What's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to 10 Hours In, where I spend 10 hours in a game and give you my honest opinion on what the game does right, what the game does wrong, and what I think about it in its current state. Today we'll be reviewing Biomutant, the long-awaited action RPG from Experiment 101 and THQ Nordic. This will be Experiment 101's first title as a development company, and a lot of hype has followed this game around since the announcement at Gamescom 2017, but fans didn't have a solid release date until January of this year. The setting for this game is a post-apocalyptic world where humans have vanished and rodents have taken over. You will control a rodent with the knowledge of Wung Fu in an attempt to either destroy or save the Tree of Life. One of the main variables in this game is the ability to choose between good and evil actions, which will affect how factions interact with you and how the game will play out altogether. This game has a lot going on and there's a lot to cover, so let's dive right into it. Upon immediately starting the game, you're greeted by a very well-designed cutscene and menu screen. You can tell the developers wanted you to experience this game as if it were a kung fu flick or some other type of action film, as everything is cinematic, from the start game screen to the transition into the character editor. The character editor itself is one of the more interesting character editors I've ever played around with. Upon entering the character editor, you're forced to choose a breed, which not only determines your general appearance, but also your character's strengths and weaknesses as far as stats go. After choosing a breed, you're then tasked with morphing your character based on which stats you want to increase, but this will also decrease all other stats as well. This mutation phase also determines your character's final appearance. While there are limitations to this type of character editor as you don't actually have full control over your character's appearance or stats, I personally really enjoyed playing around with this character editor. Finding the different morphs and features was a whole lot of fun, and I've already seen some players posting some really interesting looking characters on the discussion boards on Steam, so I think this was one of the really stronger points of the game. After mutating your character, you then choose your character's resistances and then further detail yourself out by customizing your fur pattern and color. After this, it's time to choose your class. These classes are pretty basic in my opinion. For example, the mercenary fills the role of the melee DPS specialist, the saboteur being the typical rogue or assassin role, and the sentinel filling the classic tank role. For my first playthrough, I made a Rex sentinel because he looked like a squirrel. There are a lot of problems with this class system, but I'll go over those a little bit later. By itself, the graphics are very beautiful and well optimized. Most modern systems should be able to run this thing at 60 frames per second with no problem. However, if you are experiencing problems with the game, you're pretty much out of luck, as there aren't any advanced graphics options to fine-tune for your PC setup from within the menu inside the game. There might be a configuration file somewhere in the game's directory that you can tinker with, but I haven't noticed one on my searches of the file directory as of now. Obviously, consoles won't have this problem, but as of the making of this video, there have not been any next-gen specific releases, as the PS5 runs the 1080 PS4 version and the Xbox Series X uses the 4K resolution of the Xbox One X version. Users of both consoles have reported frame rate issues, but this doesn't seem to be a problem for PC users. I honestly didn't have any problems with it either. I ran it for 60 frames per second throughout the entire time I played it. The world, which can at times feel very linear, is designed well enough that this isn't a major problem, but I feel like removing some of the terrain blocking and allowing the player to traverse freely between areas would have added another dimension to the game that just doesn't feel like it's there currently. The world design is top notch. The last game that made me stop and take in the scenery on multiple occasions was Kingdom Come Deliverance, and I think this game is around that level graphically, if not a little bit better. There are a few different biomes to explore, and every piece of landscape feels as if it was placed there deliberately. The world really has a way of unrolling before your eyes, better than most games in the ARPG genre, as nothing in this game really feels artificial. It's really easy to get immersed in the world of Biomutant. From the time you finish creating your character to the end of the game, I constantly found myself soaking up the atmosphere of the world and searching for vantage points so that I could scan the world at a different angle. The exploration aspect of this game is really one of the more important aspects of it, and I feel like a lot of the negativity directed towards this game comes from the fact that the developers really made this seem like it would be a combat-focused game, and while it kinda is, the walking and exploration aspect of this game was really the high point of it for me. Now, that's not to say that the gameplay is poor, but it definitely isn't the highlight of the game. Combat consists of using an arsenal of 3 different types of attacks: ranged attacks, melee attacks, and special skills acquired upon leveling up. Biomutant definitely isn't the first game to utilize this type of mix and match attack, but what is of note to me is the way that it was implemented. I personally like the combo system, as this allows players to switch seamlessly between range combat, melee combat, and special skills. There are even inner skill combos, which allows you to start off with melee attacks and then hit for critical damage on a ranged finisher, or vice versa. My main problem with combat is in how the character development occurs. Characters go from being highly unique at the very beginning of the game to all being able to perform the same actions with the same gear at the end of the game. Now, it's probably not a good idea to class lock players out of equipment in a single player game, but this game would have had done well to differentiate between classes in some way or the other, whether that be disallowing certain classes from using certain weapons or preventing certain classes from unlocking certain skills. From what I can tell, though, the only difference between characters in the mid to late game is the stat figures on damages, resistance, and other in-game modifiers, as the class-specific perks don't largely affect the way that each character is played. A late-game Sentinel is going to play out largely the same way as a late-game Commando. One will be able to tank better, while one will be able to deal more damage more quickly, but they'll all have the same skill sets and combos available to them. With that in mind, there's also not a whole lot to unlock as skills go. And once you unlock skills, they're on your character for the rest of the game. There aren't any move limitations, so the only decision the player has to make is, what weapons do I wield? My problem with this is that it kind of makes everybody's gameplay look the same. There are really only 2 or 3 different ways to approach combat situations, and this is going to be determined by the type of enemy you're facing anyway, so there's not a lot of combat variation. It's not horrible, but I can see how it can get old pretty quickly for some players. There was also something that really struck me as appalling for a third-person shooter, and that was the fact that the enemy lock doesn't lock the camera. This seemed very half-baked to me, as I would have my camera spinning so hard I was getting dizzy trying to lock on to another enemy, but the game pretty much forced me into killing whichever enemy it locked onto at the time. Now, I'm pretty sure I'm doing something wrong and that there actually is a way to switch enemies on the soft lock, but I think it would have made a lot more sense to hard lock the camera and add a couple key binding for scrolling through different enemies while you're shooting. I don't know how this would have played out in console, because obviously you only have so many buttons on a controller, but as far as mouse and keyboard is concerned, we've got endless keybind possibilities, so I don't see why this wouldn't have been implemented, at least for the PC. The crafting system was actually the gameplay mechanic that I enjoyed the most. In Biomutant, you piece together weapons from parts you find in the world, and these weapons look exactly like the parts that you use. The same is true for gear or armor as well. I haven't looked up the exact figure on parts, but I spent plenty of time searching through the crafting menus and exploring the different possibilities of weapon parts and modifications. This works to create a robust inventory system, which will keep you constantly in and out of your inventory, switching between ranged and melee weapon types. So if you're the type of person that really enjoys going through your inventory and seeing what kind of weapon combos you can make and how the different combos look with the different weapons, then you're probably going to enjoy this crafting system. I really feel like this game is going to be a lot better once Experiment 101 has the chance to patch, update, and add new content to it. It really feels like it got pushed out early due to budget constraints or some other kind of financial problem, and I can see how this can occur, especially with a huge publisher like THQ Nordic. This company's been around for like 4 or 5 years with THQ, and they haven't released anything, so they pretty much got no revenue coming in. The only revenue they had coming in up to this point were the pre-orders for Biomutant. So I think they really had to push it out as quickly as possible in order to show THQ Nordic that, like, hey, we've got a good product, we're selling this product, give us more budget. As it is, Experiment 101 is a pretty small studio, and as far as I know, they don't really have any other current projects, so I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be updating this game. So let me talk about what I think this game needs before I can give it a hard recommendation. The first is more skills. This combat would seem a lot less shallow if players are given some type of variety and limitations to the skills that they can equip. Everybody having access to the same skills and the same weapons regardless of class kind of waters down the experience of the game, especially if you're on the New Game Plus section of the game. Second is a more fleshed out world. While the world is absolutely stunning to look at, early player complaints are pretty much all centered around the combat and the emptiness of the world. There will need to be more random encounters, even going as far as making area specific enemy and ally spawners in order to give locations a little more flavor. There also needs to be more side quests with more variation in the quest types. Most of the quests in this game amount to fetch quests, with some other kill quests sprinkled in for variation, so it'd be a welcome addition if some other types of quests such as escort quests, stealth quests, or capture missions were implemented into the game. The third is housing. From what I can tell, the inventory is basically limitless, so there's really no need for a house to store your items, but the world would just be that much more immersive if you had some type of housing to store your mounts and your companions. Also, it's 2021. If you're doing an RPG or an action RPG and you don't have any kind of housing for the player, that's really an oversight on the part of the developer. Allowing the player to build their own housing in certain locations would also give the player more crafting possibilities for those houses. And last is co-op. Now, hear me out. I know that there was never any intention to add a co-op mode into this game. It was always supposed to be a single player game. But if you triple the enemy mobs and let me bring my friend with me, I can guarantee you a lot of the negative feedback turns into positive or neutral feedback solely based on the friend and community aspect of it. I think personally that it's a shame that I'm not able to share this game with a friend or a family member, and having somebody in this world with me would make it feel much less devoid of life and a lot more alive. In conclusion, I think a lot of the negative feedback comes from the expectations and price tag of the game. This game's been touted as a game changer since 2018, but what we got really wasn't anything new or groundbreaking. I won't say that it's a great game, but I'm also not going to say that it's a bad game. What I will say is that if you go into it expecting the Weasel Witcher, Squirrel Skyrim, Ferret Fable, or Furry Final Fantasy, you will be disappointed. If you enjoy original stories, breathtaking graphics, and multiple quest paths, then you may enjoy this game. Personally, I don't think the price point is justifiable for what was launched, but I don't see any reason why it won't be worth that price point sometime in the future. I do think reviewers were a lot less lenient on the game because of the price point, but I think a lot of the complaints that are being voiced right now are easy fixes that we should see mostly fixed within the first few months of launch. Hey, thank you all for watching, and if you want me to continue with this series, please consider liking and subscribing. I hope you all really do have an amazing day. Till next time.